Всем привет, это проект Альфа.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. You are watching War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Hello Alexey. Hello Nikolai. So perhaps we should start with all the questions connected to General Sodol, but right before our stream, the president has published a statement that the general is being removed, and we can now probably just look over some facts that are available to understand what is happening, and I think it perhaps was Toretsk as the reason for all this squabble. And the main thing that happened here is that Toretsk line has moved. And what seemed that this line would never change, this line was not moved since 2014. In this part, it malfunctioned on our side. So those positions that we had there, they are already occupied. What do you know personally? Why did this breakthrough happen? Well, there needs to be separated what do I know from what is publicly known, so do no harm. In the public sphere, military observer Konstantin Mashevets did a good review. He said that this line indeed has not moved since 2014, and suddenly the enemy makes a tactical move and captures some space about 3.5 miles long, about 2.5 miles deep. This is a tactical jump. In some parts of the front, such a move may take months to go. And here it was done very operatively brilliant and fast. So the question that arises, how was that allowed to happen? And here you start looking into the reasons that we talked about for millions of times on the stream. So the question, how we should phrase it, about the reasons, or do you want to go talk about the front first? Yeah, let's talk about the front. Okay, keep that map in mind, and let's go up after we talk more about this area. So why is it so famous? Why it was a good area of defense? Gorlovka is an area where borders of Donetsk and Lugansk districts connect. Since 2014, Russian command was deadly aware and concerned of us taking Gorlovka, and would split Lugansk and Donetsk districts along the key line, and this is the area from where you could trouble seriously both districts. This could have been the key to the whole Eastern Front during the anti-terrorist operation and the Eastern Front since 2014. In 2016, there was a moment there when the Baltseva operation was going on and Gorlovka was open. It was easy to be captured, but one of our brigades refused to go. Muzhenko personally tried to convince them to go take it. They promised, and then they refused. That was a catastrophe. There was one of the brigades, I think it was one of the fives, I don't remember the exact number. The fives were always problematic, with a very rare exception. So this is one of the lost opportunities of this war. If we would have made this move, we did not have to sign Minsk II agreements, and Russians would have never been able to kick us out of Gorlovka. It was technically an unsolvable task for the time, but what passed has passed. The front there was standing for a long time. In 2018, my right flank was touching that near Zaitseva and Golmovsky, right there where the mouse is highlighting. I knew this area and the positions of our neighbors pretty well. We've been sending some aid on occasion when they needed. And Toretsk, it's basically a balcony from which one can threaten Gorlovka forever. There are several road junctions there, and just natural terrain is so that Gorlovka is always under threat from Toretsk. And nothing has moved for a long time, and suddenly such a failure and a jump in the outline of the war line. And it needs to be analyzed, of course, but in the light of the front perspectives, now there is a hint at Toretsk operation. In order for Toretsk operation to happen, they need to the north of Kurdyumovka and Andreevka, where we have the green area, they would need Russian troops to press and to start encircling Toretsk from the north, taking Andreev Protrusion. They are pushing on Chasov Yar. Budanov refused in his recent interview to comment on Chasov Yar. It is a difficult situation there. And as we know, even from the north, you can see that they're trying to move around that Andreev protrusion. And that's a similar motion. They're doing that double pincer thing. And in 2.5 years, we're failing to react to that. We failed to learn how to deal with it. But that threat is pending over Toretsk now. And if you look at what's happening at the bottom, if Russians were not too engaged in moving further towards Pokrovsk, Toretsk would have been an issue a long time ago. They're going to that road up north to the west of New York and Nelipovka. See that yellow road to Konstantinovka, that vertical road, 6 to 12 o'clock. So if they would have taken this, that would have created issues for the whole Toretsk area of defense. But understandably, they're pushing further to cut the road from Novoalexandrovka, that one, that diagonal, to Konstantinovka. That is a key line for supply of the whole Eastern Front. And there's only Vozdvizhenka settlement that's on the way. After going through, they would have a definite bonus and access to get to this road. Understandably, they'll need to take that Baranovka to the north, but generally that's where they're going to. This is a very serious threat that would put under serious question mark supply lines for the whole Eastern Front and the whole situation on the Eastern Front. That's why Russian command is not looking at Toretsk details, but they want to grasp as much territory as they can. This is one of the features of Russian military command, to grab as much territory as they can, and that's their definite sign. Not always works. This time it seems to probably be working for them. Let's go more to the north and then we'll go south. So we have a fight going near Chasov Yar, right here to the north of the green, which probably will be in a more dire situation very soon. Then above that there is another Siversky balcony, which is a huge problem for Russians. And for now they cannot solve it, because in order to solve that part, they would need to grab a lot of troops from some other part of the front. And they are exerting some pressure. Of course, they're wasting our reserves, but they will be solving the problem of Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka road and removal of Andreev balcony to create a more streamlined front line over here. Right, exactly like that. And to get some rocade roads alongside following the front line, that will give them additional ways to supply their troops, and after that they'll get additional conditions to move toward Drushkovka and Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. Understandably, that along the Siversky Donets over here, by that green protrusion into the front, there is a Liman River that is preventing enemy from joining the flanks, and our troops are holding it. Enemy definitely does not like it. If they manage to streamline this front line, it will be additional plus 120 to their advancement opportunities, and they cannot, unfortunately for them, push forward. Very good for us, but they're pushing on the sides from it. And now they're concentrating 68th, 69th divisions across from Borovaya. They just formed them. See those two arrows? It may get a bit worse for us in this part, because they exert quite a bit of pressure, and we don't have any unusual opportunities for defense there, so it's regular stuff, and the pressure is high, so we can expect that the front line may change. Also, the logic here is similar. You can look at this part of the front, you can see that Kupyansk is a big road junction, and there is also a water reservoir. These are natural borders that would help them to hold the territory they occupy, so that's why they're pushing here. And if you go further to the north, to Volchansk, to the north of Kharkov district, everything had slowed down. We dropped quite a bit reserves in that area to stop Russian troops, and as Konstantin Mashevets is saying, that we dropped some reserves from Toretsk over up north, and understandably the enemy used this opportunity. So a question, where do we need reserves more, near Kharkov or near Toretsk? There is no answer, because there is no organ in our country that would competently judge and comment on the decision of our general command. And this is a general maneuver to discussing the destiny of Sodol, but let's still take a look at what happens in the south. Kurakhovo and Volnovakha, this is another protrusion that they want to cut, because this is the southern flank of Pokrovsk district, and this is going to the border of Donetsk, Dnepropetrovsk, and Zaporozhye districts. And this is a very sensitive topic. This is a strategic level. And generally, it is a trigger that can launch a political crisis in our country, because Dnepropetrovsk region has never been under attack over 10 years of this war, and now this is almost operative question. Now, let's look at the line of the Zaporozhye front, which is often overlooked, but the fighting rages there still. We do not move much. They also cannot have enough resources to move the front, but people are still dying, and they also need our support, and they're asking for help. In Rabotino front, there is a lot of things happening. They're trying to cut this green area and get to the Novodanilovka road, having a road behind you that gives you more flexibility. But I think they do not have much perspectives here, because they concentrated a lot of troops up on the eastern front. And more to the south, it's not a secret anymore that we're not holding Krynki here in Kherson district. And there are serious fights among the officers of the middle rank in our army, whether we needed Krynki operation or not. Some of them are saying that good, we held a lot of enemy troops here, otherwise reserves would be dropped to other parts and would have helped them in other parts. Others saying that this was a mindless operation that killed a lot of our troops, understandably 10 times more Russians, but still not exactly a success, and it is related to the name of Sodol, General Sodol as well. And there were several known hits in Crimea, where we hit several warehouses and military objects, and also there was a tragic accident when several beachgoers died on the beach, including some children. Russian air defense system worked at shooting some missiles over the beach area, and they also did not warn their people, so that's why there are civilian casualties. Over 100 people wounded. So, let me clarify one more question, Alexey, related to Toretsk. Yeah, please bring the map back. Is it true that Mashavet said that reserves have been thrown from Toretsk district over north to Kharkov? We also have heard a hypothesis that this motion was related to Chasov Yar as well, that brigades defending Chasov Yar, they've been rather tired, and Sodol made a decision to take the brigade from Toretsk direction, in more or less intact one, and move it towards Chasov Yar, and then take Chasov Yar brigades and put them down here towards Toretsk. And supposedly that caused this problem, where basically situation did not change in Chasov Yar. We have not stopped losing territory over there, and at the same time at Toretsk district, Toretsk direction, we suffered a loss. Do you think it was a right decision if it indeed happened? Listen, we cannot operate these data because in the open sources it's not available yet. Maybe you noticed it somewhere, I haven't, and I'm trying not to bring something that cannot be read elsewhere. Understandably, I may know quite a few more details, but let's address this matter from a different angle, because it's usually, in this case, it's enough. If we ask a question wider, what's more important, Toretsk, Vovchansk, or Chasov Yar? Who can estimate that? Who has the capacity to do it? Well, since you said we don't have the body that can do that, we don't. Maybe Commander-in-Chief? Exactly. And here's the destiny of Sodol. So the head of command of Azov, Arestovych, is attacking Sodol, and he is filing proper document with the investigative committee, also writes a very emotional post that got escalated and went viral. He is not stating the name of the general in it, but it goes viral and people understand whom are they talking about it. Marian Bezugla also joins the fight and starts to accuse Sodol, and people will remember that he was actually drinking in a restaurant in Odessa while Toretsk operation was happening. And some people came in and chimed in for Sodol, saying that, well, he was celebrating the graduation of his son from the military academy in Odessa, and why the general cannot celebrate his son joining the army. Then also that journalist that was attacking a 3rd brigade before joins, I think her name is Kaluzhnaya. Yes, that one. And she's attacking Sodol, that he's a butcher general, and attacks him from different angles, different rumors and other steps and missteps. And now back to our question. President appoints Gnatov instead of Sodol, and it creates a lot of questions. Why do we need the Joint Forces Command? I'm not going to say how many officers are there, a lot of them, and several generals. What kind of work are they doing, which is rather obscure for most people? It was created a long time ago, never really worked seriously, and became a sort of a graveyard for a lot of officers of the operative and strategic level who could have used more successfully in other parts of the front. For example, if we switch to a division military structure. And it exists still because nobody is strong enough to seriously pose the question, including those people who should be posting this question. Commander General, the superior Commander General. This hasn't been done under Zaluzhny, this is not happening under Syrsky. About Sodol and his command. Before that, he was a commander of the Marine Corps, right? That's the first question. The other one is, let me formulate it better. It was a funny question, but I think it was probably removed. The general was removed before our stream. You know, just like a commander of the UAV branch of forces was appointed half an hour after our stream, so I guess they precluded the rumors that we are affecting president's decisions, and they made the move before we are recording it now. So the question was, what was the reason for his removal? Because there was a lot of noise on Facebook. Is it okay to remove generals because of the noise in social media? Another, if generals can be removed like this, who can estimate their activities and the results of their work properly? Because he's now being painted with a lot of stories, and he does have a very colorful past since the beginning of this war. I should have said that probably in March. I wanted to say in March, back in the first year of this hot conflict, but there were reasons not to. So, defense of Mariupol, that decision was made by Sodol. If I was commanding troops, I would remove them from that city and I would post them alongside the river that is a little outside of it. And we would still be probably holding that area. We did not have to defend Mariupol. We should have curved the front there. We could have spared a lot of civilian lives and saved the city. We would not have 2,500 Azov and other defenders in Russian prison, and we would have spared thousands and tens of thousands of civilian lives. Although it would have been occupied, sure. Now they're saying a lot more things about details of defense of Mariupol when there were still a lot of things in motion. Sodol got one of the brigades, I think it was 95, to use to break through, especially that it was given special training. It is well trained for maneuver and action while maneuvering, and he instead split it into small groups and shoved them under different parts of the front, basically disbanding this brigade and not allowing for a breakthrough to let more people leave the city and military evacuate properly. So there are a lot of attacks on Sodol and his decision, right? He does have a colorful past. But a question still looms, whether it is okay to remove a general if you have certain attacks on him in the social media. Or for example, if some Arestovich dude expresses his own opinion somewhere. I am seriously against of such practice, because a journalist or a public figure or maybe even deputy commissioner of a certain group in Congress expressed his opinion or her opinion on that. I think this is the wrong path. I think we need a body in our country that would be capable to judge the actions of the officers, because the officers of the mid-level can be judged by the generals, but who is judging the generals? Who is capable of making the right conclusion? This is a very important task, and this is a task understood by anybody who dug a trench with his two pals, because besides just giving an order to dig, you also need to exert certain control over what's happening. So who is managing, who is exerting the control over the generality of Ukraine? Alexey, it seems that in this situation we have a president doing it, and he has a space for maneuver, and he's not owing any explanation to anybody in this configuration, right? He doesn't owe, indeed, but in the system of power, does our president have military education? No. Did he serve in the army? No. At least on a soldier rank? No. What is the basis for him to change the higher command? Why was Gnatov appointed, right? If we just follow with questions. In parentheses, we should note that Gnatov has brilliant reviews. He operated very successfully during this war on different parts of the front. He understands what modern warfare is, and people are naming 4 or 5 last names like Drabatov, Gnatov, and a few others who actually are supported in troops and who are very effective. But let's forget that. General M is replaced with General N. Why did that happen? How was it clear that one needs to be replaced with the other? Because Facebook said that? Do you people really want that your lives and the lives of your country and your friends would be managed by people who are appointed and removed by a call via social media? That problem highlighted a serious problem that we do not have a key mechanism to estimate the effectivity of a key component of military, of a key military institute, the actions of generality. If that would be said by Vasily Pupkin without military education, some Joe Schmo from the street who hasn't been to the office, doesn't know how decisions are made, I would probably have said, oh, he's a smart dude and has good logic. But since this is a very uncomfortable dude in a blue shirt who is saying that today, who has both military education, experience, has been to the office, and not just to the office, but at the part of the office that is responsible for national security, I can say that this mechanism, as an institutional mechanism, is absent. It is a chain of short meetings, conversations, and personal discussions, and argumentation on the level, oh no, he's a good fella. Oh no, this guy is toxic. And not to continue exacerbating this problem, there should be created an organ under the President, Superior Commander-in-Chief, parallel to the headquarters of General Command, create them out of the well-known generals and well-established professional generals. Make sure that you bring representatives from different branches, make sure they get enough data from intel services, and let this body constantly evaluate decisions made by acting generals on the front. And make sure that they have a way to express that and communicate with the president. In this case, those butchers, as they're being called by the public opinion, who killed a lot of our troops and civilians due to their ineffective actions, will have a proper oversight over them. And we had a lot of situations when brigade commanders were removed for losses of certain front elements and, like a platoon position, and then we'd waste more people taking it back. Stupid decisions indeed were made. And I understand there were a lot of stupid decisions made by General S in this case, let's not name the last name, but there is no judgment on that, because there is an officers' clan and they choose not to attack him on this. If you're above major, you already have professional deformation, you need that, you do not express that many emotions about loss of life, because otherwise you'll just go crazy. So I'm not going to attack them on this. This is just professional deformation, like surgeons and doctors, they have their dark humor about dying patients. As they're saying, good surgeon has a cemetery somewhere that allowed him to learn. Good general has 10 times that cemetery. But the problem is that they need to be able to learn from the mistakes. There has to be a system that exchanges experience, that highlights good decisions, and somebody needs to be controlling it. We have a lot of living heads of command, starting from Muzhenko, Popko, and the others. They're alive and they're well functioning. Gather them together, give them enough information so they can judge on the decisions and moves by the acting commander-in-chief, and give that data to the president so he could make informed decisions about effectivity of his war generals. This would enable our armed forces to grow in quality, to fight better, and to use the experience better and more creatively. Without that organ, there is just no opportunity to do that. And this organ has not been established in 2.5 years of this war, and I don't think it will be created till the end of war. So my question is, who will be judging the actions of general? They're in the ideal position.
Any attempts to pressure them through the criminal cases via the investigative organs, like Zaluzhny and his surroundings were pressured, this is kindergarten. I did talk to one of the generals who was interrogated, and he told me that he is coming to one of these interrogations, to the officer, and it was during the counteroffensive, so he drops everything, goes to that event, and the investigator is asking him what is the difference between battalion and a company. The general shrugs and answers that he has no time to educate the investigators and leaves. So on one hand, we have those fantastic heroes, however they are praised in the society, because there is mythology around them. On the other hand, generality doesn't have any objective control over them, any oversight over them. And Arestovich cannot be called a coward, right? He already cannot hold it, and he is going to the public space, filing a case against one of his older commanders into the investigative organs of Ukraine. That's what the battalion commanders and other generals are talking, is because some group of generals have a total uncontrolled situation there. There is just nobody controlling them. If that organ was created back when I suggested to create it, on the 26th of February 2022, and then on the 4th, and then on the 5th, and then on the 9th, we had a conversation. We need to create that, we need to have that. And then perhaps, and by the way, not only me who was suggesting this idea, we probably would have a chance to avoid these bloody cul-de-sacs of this war and failure to deal with the same schema that Russian troops are using that is successful for them for the whole 2 years of this conflict. A small pause, step back. Any activity doesn't have to be military. Your opponent is using for 2.5 years the same schema. No new creative solutions. Answer me, do you think you can train a bunny to smoke in 2.5 years? Or perhaps to train a bear to ride a bicycle? In 2.5 years, one can learn Chinese to a very good level. And we're failing to do that. We're failing to learn the lessons. We're being screwed on the same schema over and over again, because generals have no control. Nobody is forcing them to learn the lessons. And to do that, somebody needs to be a general providing the oversight. It has to be an authoritative figure. They have to have a lot of responsibility, have to have a lot of resource and reward for honest implementation of their work, because of course they're also in relations with existing generals and they're part of the same group, but still it's doable. And unfortunately this organ has not been made yet. And that shows once again that our government is run rather ineffectively. There are some key holes, key lacunas, which have been understood, named, foreseen a while ago, and nothing was done about them. And again, the same people are telling us as a society that we're fighting with our eternal enemy for the surviving of our nation. So if this fight is so serious, perhaps we should actually start doing something. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Nikolai, do we need to do anything when things are fucked up? Because I'm lost. Absolutely, we do need to do that, Alexey. And we're also in such a position, I think we're in a low-risk threshold, reviewing only our battlefield and not even looking at the potential global battlefield that can happen. And there are a lot of precursors to that. And from time to time, additional external threats are actualizing on a big chessboard, so to say. And we need to, I guess, act and think it through from the high perspective. Mariana Bezugla actually mentioned in her statement that we do face a risk of a global conflict, and we have no standards to apply to the leaders of our military branch of government to assess their effectiveness, because I don't think we ever estimated the risk of such an event while it actually is existing. And she's also mentioning that we do face a big risk of not even being a state soon. So the challenge is not just temporary, it's just right now, and then the war will be over and we'll somehow get by. That we shouldn't be preparing for anything else, while in reality the risk might be much larger than we can consider it under Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Yeah, I can imagine these guys like Sodol coordinating the left flank with Poland in case of a serious conflict on Europe, and I'm getting teary-eyed. And if our state would decide to off itself and commit a suicide, there is nothing you and I can do about it, except for maybe talk about it and, speak out loud that our state wants to die, we probably are too burdened by statehood, we are too lazy to get off the couch to defend our country and to listen to wise people giving us active and actual advice. And eventually, some of us will die here and others in immigration will be writing letters that we've lost another chance that we had in 100 years. Only this time it probably will be twisted in a way that the generals lost this war because politicians failed to control themselves, to control the generals. And that would be a slightly different interpretation of events than from a previous chance we had. So, okay, could be that page in history. I cannot object against that. I can just note it here. There is a risk, Alexey, though, that this all can get to Canada and Europe, to those who leave into immigration. Oh yeah, Nikolai, our fools do not understand that if Russia prevails, in about 10 years, all of our active participants of this conflict will be destroyed, just like after the war in Chechnya. A lot of them were assassinated later, and it also would be difficult to argue with Russia and their suits to international police to capture and transfer war criminals, because everybody on the losing side will automatically be condemned as a war criminal. And remember that fairy tale, Pinocchio? What was the main note that Borotino's father expressed to all of the dolls? He was saying that your thoughts, Pinocchio, are so short. They are very short thoughts, maybe for a month and a half, in our case. All right, regardless, Alexey, media activity of the leaders of Azov, of the 3rd Storm Brigade, this is an unusual event, an outstanding event in our media sphere. And Krativich is writing that I am not the one who doesn't give a fuck. I want to make sure that I do everything to address issues that I think need to be addressed. And like in every organization in the army, there are leaders who do care and who do not care. Even despite the certain desensitization about losses, some of them still do care about the effectivity. What is the criteria to separate the generality, the higher command level officers? I don't have a proper military education, so it's difficult for me to formulate it. Well, Nikolai, generals can only be judged by generals. Of course, there has to be some feedback from their subordinates. Brigade commanders should also provide their input, but this is a secondary. This is in addition to generals. Problem is that generals, they function as a family, as a mafia in sort of way. And in order to judge them, you need more generals. And you need to pick the ones with a lot of respect, a lot of experience, and provide them with resources. And as I said, make sure that they get rewarded fantastically and perhaps get chances to become Minister of Defense or Minister of National Defense Council. And if you ill perform, then we'll find the cases where you did. And if you got corrupted with other generals, well, whom you're investigating and reviewing, we'll find a way to prosecute you. That's doable. But in case of Azov, where left nationalists are struggling with right nationalists, journalists are writing that the 3rd Brigade has a politician as a commander, and those brigades who were holding Avdiivka were heroes, and the 3rd was brought there just for a month, and then they started whining. And the 3rd was accused basically by the journalist gang that they're going to public space immediately after they face any difficulties on the front and start giving interviews and causing waves. Let's take a look at this. Is it true or is it not? Because in our military, we do have another line of conflict, volunteers versus cadre military. 3rd is a very special brigade. It is special, but by the way, Azov is a very special detachment too. These are people who graduated from the right national movement. These are people who always had a very bright political position, those who had a party and still have, I think, because formally they have not ceased their function. And these are the people who revealed themselves to be very active during Poroshenko elections. Those are the ones who are going to Zelensky's office and pouring paint on it. And they're the ones who can provide very serious political pressure on any government. Due to a certain political talent, the command of Azov and the 3rd Brigade, which is comprised of the veterans of Azov, both Beletsky and Prokopenko and people around them, they have certain talent. They have certain talent to lead, and they have a lot of people gravitating towards them. They're actually fighting as some of the best joint forces of our defense, both Azov and the 3rd. They're holding the front, they're conducting everything they need to do in defense. They're successful in offensive operations, and they always cause a lot of casualties on the enemy's side. And obviously they are the symbol of hatred for Russian side. For Putin's troops, they definitely see those scary so-called Nazis in Azov and the 3rd Brigade. And of course, Azov and the 3rd Brigade use a lot of support from our citizens. And by the way, recently there was a limit lifted from Azov. Some lobby worked and made its rounds, and eventually limitations to supply and support Azov detachment was lifted in America. I have a question here. How many times was the 3rd Brigade withdrawn from the front to refit and replenish itself and rest? And according to the current data that I have, the largest time span they had to recover is 3 weeks. This is probably the brigade with the smallest time to recuperate, with the smallest time for R&R. It keeps being thrown into the difficult situation after a difficult situation on the front. And if you go follow their history where they were thrown, what tasks did they carry out, then you start having a lot of questions, which of course they ask within the 3rd Brigade, and those people who follow them are also asking these questions. And sooner or later, there is a question to be posted, whether the 3rd Brigade was brought to Avdiivka to face Mariupol scenario. Right, we're not young here. We can look truth in the eyes and say things that people are talking about. There are scenarios that people are discussing that the 3rd was planned to die there near Avdiivka, or at least to be destroyed significantly. And it is being attacked by that system because they refused to be decimated. Regardless of that, special relations between the military at large and the 3rd Brigade and society and the 3rd Brigade is obvious. And Beletsky, their leader, is not making political statements. He is leading the recruitment, he is leading military activities. People are provoking him for different statements, but he found it within himself, both wisdom and a lot of will to refrain from politics. But these questions are obviously rising, both for him and for people around him. And behind that, there's a bigger question. How do we treat the volunteers? Remember the destiny of the 60, what was the number of that? From the right sector, 67th Brigade, I think, which was disbanded because they refused to follow a certain order. I think it was 67th. But there was an issue. Yeah, it was 67th, Alexey, right. So, second, with the Da Vinci Wolves and the others, and more and more and more with the volunteers, our cadre military have more issues. Starting from 2014, I'll tell you more, I did not join cadre military in 2014 for that same reason. I am a cadre officer myself. I saw how the generals and colonels are commanding our army, and I said I'm not going to obey the orders of these people. That's why the People's Reservist was created as a standalone initiative, as a private initiative. This conflict is permanent. It already bursted in different cases when there was a low-intensity warfare on the 16th and the 19th and the 21st, 22nd, and it will erupt. That abscess will erupt hugely at the end of this war. We can only imagine the scale of it. So the question, who will be solving this potential conflict between volunteers and cadre generals, which recently was bubbled up via the statement of Krutevich. Who will be judging military decisions made by cadre general? The decisions about rotation, decisions about operations. Girls from that Hromadske TV or Facebook, bloggers, they'll be discussing whether Sodol is correct or whether Azov is doing right. Again, we're going back to the need in a certain political organ, military organ, that will be both giving judgment to actions of our generality and providing feedback to our state leadership, and creating a system within our government, helping create that system that helps to shine the light on the deficiencies of our military system and also would have a way to remedy them, or help remedy them at least. Because otherwise we have a three-sided conflict. We have cadre at the head of the military, we have civilians who are mobilized. Most of those who are fighting now, they're civilians. And we also have volunteers who are civilians who came as volunteers to the army and became professionals. So we have three centers of gravity in the military. And that structure is a very fertile land for conflict. So when a brigade commander is being removed for a social media post, you can multiply this conflict by 20 times. You can only imagine what will happen after this war is over and when people will start saying real truth about this war. When they'll be bringing old scores and trying to settle them. And this can actually lead to a deep situation, crisis situation on the front and crumbling of the front, because troops are being exhausted, new recruits are not there yet, the quality of them is still under big question. I was recently given an example when an officer ran out of his detachment and he asked for refitting. He got 20 people refitting. The youngest of them was 50 years old. Half of them died during the first 24 hours. You know why? When FPV drone is flying at them, they are too slow to dive back in the trench because they're not young. But they actually honestly fought in their positions. None of them left it, even though their neighbors were whining. So big kudos and honors to them, but it's a sad picture that these are the people who are being sent to the front. Their health does not afford them to be heroes on the front line. We should be able to find others instead. Army today is a big conflict. It's a big mix of issues and sharp pains because it's real live people dying. It's friends dying and brothers dying. And human blood is not water. People are remembering it. And after the war, they will be bringing up these scores. And this is a huge issue that will break at the end of this war, that will have reflection both on the external front and also inside in Ukraine, when we'll have situations when heroes with medals will be fighting each other, because there are a lot of tension lines between them. Now question, who besides Mariana Bezuglia and this journalist and Butusov and that Feldman who is doing with whoever comes to his studio to trying to address these issues. Who in that huge European country is doing it? These 5 people? Is that the representation for 1.3 million of military forces to solve these issues? Are you sure we should be solving these conflicts via Facebook? Shouldn't we have some institutions, some expert groups perhaps, some early detection think tanks, and figuring out the problems both on the personal level and on the level of system? Is there a group that gathers just different conflict issues, conflict statistics from the military? VSP perhaps have to do that, Alexey. Oh, no, not those conflicts. VSP and VKR are solving different issues. We need an institutional thing. I don't see it. I can look under my table, Alexey, but I'm quite sure I won't find anything there. Right? Our listeners, if you know of such a group, please write that in the comments. Perhaps, it walked by you. Maybe they're sitting drinking beer somewhere nearby. Maybe it's a group on Facebook and we just don't know how to find it. It cannot not exist, right? We should have one. Maybe they're on Hromadski television. Maybe journalists can give us advice if they have this group. We can come there and we can talk to them. Because you guys are outstanding military experts, supposedly, who know which generals should be removed. The girls from Hromadski TV, military correspondents, right? They know all the details. Do you know that one of the first actions that Sodol undertook when he took the command of the joint forces, he fired most of press service and information officers because he doesn't need them. That's a general understanding the modern warfare. And then when he became a target of attacks, he didn't have anybody to defend him. Well, perhaps Alexei, he thought that he will defend himself via a different route, but as the president's message today showed that he failed. Indeed, he did. By the way, Kaluzhna, I think, is a journalist of Bigus Info, not exactly of Hromadski TV. At least that's how she's presented in other media. In response to her complaints. Yeah. So it's difficult to judge that situation, and I want to say that we've been reviewing that story since 2014, and there were no conclusions made about what happened with volunteers in Ilovaisk. What exactly happened there? Who gave which orders? Because volunteer corps that entered Ilovaisk, those were the ones who were decimated on the exit. And it was known that Russian troops are already approaching. There were messages coming from NATO, from foreign media, from our neighbors' intel, and I mean 2014. I was there myself at that time, and I saw how the decisions were made to send volunteers, for example, Donbass battalion, in there. So conclusions and lessons learned were not learned back then. And even in the logic of a usual citizen, one, I think, needs to understand that the 3rd Brigade is our army's gold, which needs to be thrown only where they need some extraordinary effort, where they need some specific work carried out. You cannot just dump them onto the part of the front to hold it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Nikolai, they can be sent to any part of the front because the Storm Brigade cannot be just doing storming actions. They need to be able to do all kinds of activities, including defense. But we're talking about a different aspect here, I think. Let's say you have 2 successful detachments, Azov and the 3rd, which have very good success and a lot of experience. What is the government doing? They should be scaling it, right? They should be making a division out of it. Convert brigade into a division is very simple. Battalions become the basis for new brigades. Battalion commanders become brigade commanders, and they preserve the school and the methods and trainings and everything else that they already have established. They all train new recruits, and they gather and join them unitedly under the same umbrella. And brigade commander becomes a division commander. And at minimum 6 months, but at least 9 months better, you can turn that into a division and then turn it into an army. And 93rd Brigade, by the way, is also very successful. We're doing the fundraiser for them today for the UAV. If you guys can help, that would be fantastic. They're fighting on a very difficult part of the front. There's also 80th Paratroopers Storm Brigade, which have managed to preserve themselves for over 10 years. They've changed several brigade commanders, but they're still maintaining a high level of efficiency. And it all ends in the systemic level of decisions on the level of Minister of Defense. If I had a chance to run it, that's exactly what I'd be doing. But in the current situation, there are people who are winking at each other and saying, well, imagine there'll be the whole division of Azov. What if they start affecting politics? Well, how about you guys conducting your politics in a fashion that divisions will not be coming after you? Because if you think you'll get away with the shit you're doing, after the war, that brigade will find more people than a division to support them, and they can still come after you, dear politicians. And they might present a big list of questions that they would present to the authorities for the way they were fighting and using them. Why are you afraid of it? Conduct normal politics and you should not be afraid of reaction. Okay, I have a clarification question here and maybe a hypothesis. Would it be smart in our conditions, given that volunteers is a critically important element of our society? We should be cultivating these numbers, right? We should be finding ways to grow that number, to amplify it. Shouldn't we rebuild the military on the volunteer example and reroute it towards the volunteer structures, and all these cadre generals and the rest should be in the structure of control if they know how to fight and they know the process? No, Nikolai, that will not work like this, because the systemic military education and the growth within the military structure is difficult to be replaced with anything. The main thing in the officer is not that he or she can fight, right? Volunteers, they showed how, being civilians initially, they learned rather quickly that they can how to fight. What is also important is the experience of being within that system, because 1,300,000 volunteers, do you think it's real? No, I don't think so. There'll be always a bright component of it, but there'll be just a component of the military. Big continental warfare will be mostly conducted by mobilized people, mobilized cadre. And this is historically based, very well researched and balanced, and there are ways to do it smart, not like we are doing. In a good scenario, military should be, I'm sorry for that example, but should be closer to what Russians are doing. They're giving a rather good example, because for continental warfare, you cannot create just cadre, just mobilized, or just volunteers. It will be a combination of different ones on all of these resources. And then you have a problem of sequencing all these cultures, which are different. And I want to remind our viewers that on the 22nd, there was an annual date of Prigozhin's coup. And that was one of the examples of having offensive forces created from different sources, which also led to a very serious conflict between volunteers of Wagner and conscripts from inmates and the cadre military. And I have a question here to our state leaders. You guys not afraid of a military coup in Ukraine? Because, you know, with a tempo like that, at some point, people may decide not to write letters to investigative organs, and I'm not meaning Azov in this case, military in general, because the way the army is being treated very often, it is being just murdered. It is not being provided enough, it is not being used effectively, just because 5 or 6 so-called effective generals and so-called effective civilians within the administration think that they can manage it and that we can mobilize more people. You cannot express, and I'm appealing to the state leaders, you cannot be just expressing that you are concerned. It's not for you. People on the sofas, family members can be concerned about their friends fighting. From you, what they're expecting are systemic decisions. No excuses, dear friends. And commanders supreme commanders should be changed, headquarter command should be changed, but what can they do without a system? For example, they brought Gnatov, instead of Sodol. There'll be same environment with same officers, same commander-in-chief, same logistics. Perhaps he can change some things, but he won't change system dramatically. But yeah, you can, of course, shuffle the bets. Right, just finish off with the whorehouse. Exactly. What about Bezugla interview? Have you watched it in its entirety? No, just snippets of it. I think the most important element, let's start with Syrsky. Do you think Syrsky appointment was a mistake? Mariana said that perhaps it could have been done differently, that a person might reveal his talents, having taken the position, perhaps become more inclusive, less authoritarian, more transparent, right? No, I don't mean transparent, but that he probably would soak in the problems of higher caliber and would start making smarter decisions. But in case of Syrsky, she gave him a judgment that he became more authoritative, more reckless, and she's asking whether this appointment was correct. And she's asking whether removal of Zaluzhny was a mistake or not. So given all that, given 4 months of his command, what can you say about it? Nikolai, this is also a conversation about two guys from social media who need to judge the commander-in-chief. This is also wrong. I can say a lot of things about Syrsky because I did communicate with him back when I was major, and he was commander of the army. We had a conversation one-on-one in his office. He called me with a question, why do we have a major blogger in our midst? And he has a lot of strong sides and definitely has some deficiencies, but this is not the right conversation. Bloggers should not be evaluating commanders-in-chief. They should be judged by an institutionalized system of gauging the effectiveness of higher command, and any command for that matter. Even the deputy head of the committee should not be judging him militarily, even though she has some rights from the parliamentary control. The law actually outlines that she has to be doing some of that. But bloggers definitely should not be making decisions or causing decisions to be made so easily, regardless of whether it's Arestovich or anybody else. So that's why let's separate what do I think about that and what actually should be done. Let's start with Mariana's supposition that the officer who was elevated higher should become softer was never affirmed by any officer. It is technically impossible. The whole system works in a fashion that the higher you're elevated, the more authoritarian you become in the military. Second, over 4 months, again, this is my point of view, this is not the truth, the absolute truth. But I'm a private person, I can discuss some of the opinions. Some of the deficiencies that Syrsky had as the initial commander, these deficiencies are rather known to his army. For example, I'll call one problem. He cannot overcome a desire that he expressed back in 2014, 2015 to remove intermediate chains of command and personally allocate troops to their positions. And it appears that the whole Moscow school is like that. That commanders of platoons, company commanders, brigade commanders are their obstacles. They want to manage everything, every platoon, every tank. And on one hand, it is understood because sometimes command level is rather low with his subordinates and you want to push them aside and say, hey, see how it should be done. On the other hand, you're violating the holiest principle in the military, the single command. Because military are winning or losing based on this principle, whether it is used and used effectively or not. He graduated from the Moscow Military Academy, so he should have been learning it there. On the second day of my studies, we already were introduced to this concept. But even a squad commander, and I ended up being there initially, then platoon commander cannot give an order directly. He should be giving it through his deputy, through a sergeant. When I became that deputy, I was commanding individual trainees only through squad commanders. Yes, of course, they can be weak, you need to help them grow, there are always changes, but unity of command is a holy principle. I command only those who are directly subordinate to me, and they command their own. But our generals, unfortunately, have that deficiency, and Mariana showed it right. Look at the pictures that are being posted on the Commander General. It looks on these pictures like when he's visiting a brigade commander, he's taking the seat of brigade commander. What does brigade commander look like then? Like a waiter in the room? And then they just lean over and communicate with him from a much less appropriate position. Commander should not be positioned like this. When commander-in-chief is visiting, he needs to produce respect to the commanding officer in that detachment. Brigade commander needs to remain in his position. Nobody is moving him. Command post has to work the way they do, nominally. Meetings should be done in a separate room to not obstruct the process. Or if there is no such opportunity, then at least in a dedicated corner of the building. And during the meeting, the officers have to turn to each other in a respectful manner, using name and patronymic, as it is customary among officers to conduct meetings of that nature, without ranks and positions. End of part 1.